What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from the Quartering, and this morning we had a pretty big, spicy new Twitter files drop on top of some congressional hearings over the Twitter files and over the suppression of Americans' First Amendment rights and the unlawful monitoring, in my opinion, of Americans over expressing dissent or perhaps unapproved opinions on Twitter. And of course, even the request of certain journalists. Finally, journalists finally cared about Twitter files because they were revealing that journalists were their information was being requested by the United States government. It's never been more clear that our First Amendment right was completely trampled on, and we see things like today, Representative Stacey Plaskett of a Democrat refers to Matt Taibbi and Schellenberg as, quote, so-called journalists. You can see some fiery exchanges.
And to praise him for his work. This isn't just a matter of what data was given to these so-called journalists before us now. There are many legitimate questions about where Musk got the financing to buy Twitter. We know for a fact that foreign countries...
So-called journalists, and of course, the response, which is great.
That time was spent at Rolling Stone magazine. Ranking Member Plaskett, I'm not a so-called journalist. I've won the National Magazine Award, the I.F. Stone Award for Independent Journalism, and I've written 10 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers. I'm now at that time.
You can hear the laughing, right? You can hear the laughing on the mic. What I think is particularly amazing. She represents the American Virgin Islands, so-called American areas. I mean, like, I love how she's like, doesn't even bother to look at him during his reply because she's a coward loser. Then you also see Matt Taibbi's opening statement on the Twitter files and censorship industrial complex. I want to show, it's just 4 minutes long, but I'm not going to show the whole thing, but I'll show you some of it.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the Select Committee, thank you for having me today. My name is Matt Taibbi. I've been a reporter for 30 years and a staunch advocate of the First Amendment. Much of that time was spent at Rolling Stone magazine. Ranking Member Plaskett, I'm not a so-called journalist. I've won the National Magazine Award, the I.F. Stone Award for Independent Journalism, and I've written 10 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers. I'm now the editor of the...
I don't know who's that laughing on the mic. It might be the other guy testifying. He sounds nervous, but he's doing good.
Magazine Racket on the independent platform Substack. I'm here today because of a series of events that began late last year when I received a note from a source online. It read, "Are you interested in doing a deep dive into what censorship and manipulation was going on at Twitter?" A week later, the first of what became known as the Twitter Files reports came out. To say these attracted intense public interest would be an understatement.
So he goes on and says, quote, Twitter, Facebook, Google, and other companies developed a formal system for taking in moderation requests from every corner of government, from the FBI, DHS, HHS, DOD, Global Engagement Center at state, even the CIA. For every government agency scanning Twitter, there were perhaps 20 quasi-private entities doing the exact same thing. And that was a key kind of delineation fact, or a key discovery in the initial Twitter files. And that's, while sometimes the government was directly involved, as it seemed with Agent Elvis Chan, I believe, in California, where he's like making direct requests of Twitter. There were also many almost like operatives. They would contract out work to do their bidding so that they could wash their hands of the direct infringement of the United States citizens' First Amendment rights. You see Twitter file statement of Congress, the censorship industrial complex. You see true content which might provide poke history, all this kind of stuff that goes in here. 2, monitor all tweets coming from Trump's personal account, Biden's personal account. When Twitter Files reporters were given access to Twitter's internal documents last year, we focused on the company, which at times acted like power above government. And now they're just leaking DMs here from Del Harvey and Yoel Roth saying that's real weird, IMO. I talked with Vijaya, Sean, read the whole P2 thing for both the COOF and elections. Vijaya wants to aim for 30 minutes SLA for labeling these two things. In exchange, she was okay with, quote, us asking Twitter's I'm assuming Twitter services or whatever, to monitor all tweets coming from Trump's personal account and Biden's personal account, Trump's official and and Biden's official. Sign off to apply the label coming from any one of them and to err on the side of labeling. And this is, while there's some big changes, well, if she wanted to get to 30 minutes. But Twitter acted more like a partner, an actual partner to government. With other tech firms, it held regular industry meetings, the FBI, the DHS, and developed a formal system for receiving thousands of content reports from every corner of government, HHS, Treasury, NSA, and even local police. You can see all these various requests and all these meetings they had. Oh, Russia status, China status, global status, planning for elections. This is with Elvis Chan, of course. Emails from the FBI, DHS, and other agencies often came with spreadsheets of hundreds of or thousands of account names for review. Often they would be deleted soon after. Many were obvious misinformation, like accounts urging people to vote the day after the election. But the official disinfo reports had shakier reasoning. They highlighted Twitter analysis here disagrees with the FBI about account deemed a proxy of Russian actors. Then we saw, of course, disinfo lists where evidence was even less clear. This list of 378 Iranian state-linked accounts included an Iraq vet once arrested for blogging about the war, a former Chicago Sun-Times reporter, and Truthout, a site that publishes Noam Chomsky. In some cases, state reports didn't even assert misinformation. Here is a list of YouTube videos it flagged for anti-Ukraine narratives. Again, YouTube videos that were anti-Ukraine. But the bulk of censorship requests did not come from government directly. Asked if Twitter's marketing department could say the company detects misinfo with the help of outside experts, a Twitter executive replied with the following: "Not sure we'd describe the FBI/DHS as experts or some NGOs that aren't academic." We came to think of this grouping, state agencies, DHS, FBI, or GEC, along with NGOs that aren't academic, and unexpectedly aggressive partner commercial news media, as the censorship industrial complex. Who's in the censorship industrial complex? Twitter in 2020 helpfully compiled a list for a working group set up in 2020, the National Endowment for Democracy, the Atlantic Council's DFR Lab, and Hamilton 68's creator, the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Twitter executives weren't sure about Clemson Media's Forecast Lab, too chummy, and they weren't keen on Rand Corporation, too close to the US DoD, but others were deemed just right. Essentially here, he's talking about how they are working like directly to censor Americans. And you see here, their taxpayer-backed conclusions: the state should have total access to data to make searching easier. Speech offenders should be put into a holding area, and government should probably restrict disinformation, even if it means, quote, losing some freedom. That, of course, was a report that was co-authored by Katie Couric and Chris Krebs, the founder of DHS Cybersecurity and Infrastructure. Note, Aspen recommended the power to mandate data disclosure be given to the FTC, which this committee just caught in a clear abuse of office, demanding information from Twitter about communications and the identities of the Twitter Files reporters. Naturally, Twitter's main concern regarding the Aspen report was making sure Facebook got hit harder than any resulting regulatory changes. You see, one takeaway here on how to separate ourselves from the examples and recommendations that read primarily geared towards Facebook. The same agencies, FBI, DHS, GEC, invite the same experts, funded by the same foundations, trailed by the same reporters, seemingly to every single conference, every single panel. The Twitter files show the principles of this incestuous, self-appointed truth squad moving from law enforcement intelligence to the private sector and back, claiming a special right to do what they say is bad practice for everyone else, be fact-checked only by themselves. While Twitter sometimes pushed back on technical analysis from NGOs about what it was and what wasn't a bot on the subject matter questions like the poke our elections, they instantly defer to sites like PolitiFact, funded by the exact same people that fund NGOs, Newark and Knight. Twitter files repeatedly showed media acting as proxy for NGOs, with Twitter bracing for bad headlines if they don't get rid of accounts. Here, the Financial Times gives Twitter until the end of the day to provide a, quote, steer on whether RFK Jr. and other poke offenders will be zapped, saying, oh, we're going to run a bad headline if you don't address it. Well, you say, so what? Why shouldn't civil society organizations and reporters work together to boycott misinformation? Isn't that not an exercise of free speech, but particularly enlightened form of it? The difference is these campaigns are taxpayer funded through the state. Though the state is supposed to stay out of domestic propaganda, the Aspen Institute, Graphica, Atlanta Council's DFR Lab, New America, and other anti-disinformation labs were receiving huge public awards. Some NGOs like GEC-funded Global Disinformation Index or the DoD-funded NewsGuard not only seek moderation, but apply subjective risk or reliability scores to media outlets, which can result in a reduction of revenue. Do we want government in this role? Perhaps the ultimate example of absolute fusion of state and corporation, the civil society organizations in the Stanford Internet Observatory, whose, quote, election integrity partnership is among the most voluminous flaggers in the Twitter files. After a public uproar paused the Orwellian Disinformation Governance Board of the DHS in early 2020, Stanford created the EIP to fill the gaps legally, as Director Alex Stamos explains here. I mean, ultimately, after the 2020 election, when the EIP was renamed the Virality Project, the Stanford lab was onboarded to Twitter's JIRA ticketing system, absorbing this government proxy into Twitter's infrastructure with a capability of taking in an incredible 50 million tweets a day. I mean, it's absolutely insane. In one remarkable email, the Virality Project recommends that multiple platforms take action even against stories of true poke side effects and true posts which could fuel hesitancy. None of these leaders of the effort to police COOF speech had health expertise. Kind of a big deal, right? I mean, this is absolutely insane. This is, and I don't want to rob Taibbi of it, read everything word for word, but, you should read his work directly. I mean, this is perhaps the biggest, most important Twitter file thread to date. Roth adding, we shouldn't comment repeatedly on Twitter files. When Twitter learned the truth about scandals like Project Birmingham, they said nothing. Like banks were silent about the mortgage fraud. Reporters also kept quiet, protecting fellow, quote, stakeholders. Twitter stayed silent out of political caution. Diresta, who ludicrously claimed she thought Project Birmingham was just an experiment to investigate what they thought could grow an audience using sensational news, hinted at a broader reason. Quote, I know there were people who believed the Democrats needed to fight fire with fire, she told the New York Times. It was absolutely chatter going around the party. It's like, insane. In the digital age, this sprawling new information control bureaucracy is an eerie sequel to the dangerous Dwight Eisenhower warned about in his farewell address when he said the potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power exists. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully we'll see some good stuff going on at Congress and coming out of this, but I remain cautious at best. We'll talk to you again real soon.